Hey everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing Chungking Express. This film came out in 1994 and it was directed by Wong Kar-wai. He rose to prominence really in the late 80s and the early 90s when Hong Kong cinema was really starting to take shape. And I think with this particular film, Chungking Express, it was the first one I think that really came together in the way that he needed for his career. It's where everything clicked, everything felt cohesive, and his vision truly came to life compared to, the failure before with Ashes of Time, which was, supposed to be this very ambitious, very expensive piece that maybe he wasn't quite ready for at the time. And trying to do so much, he sort of faced a personal crisis with that one when it wasn't received the way that he wanted it to. So instead of going bigger and better as people tend to do in those situations, he decided to do what I think is really a good thing for creative types to do when they reach maybe a writer's block or an identity crisis, a creative identity crisis, and that's just to strip it back and go back to the fundamentals, why you love film as an art in the first place. And that's what he did with this film. It feels like he focused a lot more just on the core of things, on the mood, which is I think where he ties his emotions to. And I really do see this film as a masterpiece. It truly is effortless, and everything about love and feeling and all of that is explored mainly through the sensory experience. To me, he gives dimension to feelings in a way that very, very few people do. And it's like he explores emotions in ways that maybe human language can't. Like, it feels like there are certain emotions that we never developed words for because maybe they're too complex or, just a word hasn't existed, but he gives it that color. He brings out the facets of feelings that are very, very hard to describe, that may not be tangible for human beings. And by doing that, you are able to, or he is able to, with his films, drift into this very hazy, very dreamlike place of melancholy, as well as curiosity and humor. When I think of this movie, I instantly think of a quote from a boyfriend that I used to have years ago. And the quote was saying, the hardest thing about being in a relationship, any sort of close relationship, is how you start out as strangers and then you become friends, you become one, you become each other's everything, and then suddenly you are strangers again. And it's a very simple thing to say, but it's very, very true. And I just always think about that when I think about this movie and just the pain of it, the underlying sense of pain that you feel, because that's what this film is about. It's really just about all kinds of different connections and what they mean. You have fleeting connections, brief connections, and then you have maybe longer connections that are more meaningful. Yet that's not necessarily true. Sometimes even just the briefest of encounters can change your whole life forever. And all of these interactions, whatever they are, they all sort of blend together, not only in our memories, but we start to take on certain habits of other people, whether we know it or not. Through habit, through just environment and the way that we are built, a lot of us do the same things just based on routine, based on a society. But also there's this idea, that like even through connections, you might have a connection that lasts years and years that is very intimate, but sometimes it's just that brief moment where you're looking at someone from across the room and you never see them again. And sometimes just that can change your whole life. And that's another thing I think of when I think of this particular director. He's somebody who breathes life into the idea of being able to see somebody, from across the street or something just for a moment. And you share this special moment and then it's gone. Lost among just a sea of other people, and you don't know anything about those people at all. And through that concept, even if it is simple, there's just that feeling of longing, of intrigue, of wanting to find oneness with something or someone. Yet because of the nature of, again, environments, society, especially the nature of time, that bitterness tinges moments like that, of moments of wonderment. Watching this film also just as an experience is very interesting because, in terms of plot, it feels almost like a labyrinth, but it's like very dark. It's almost like you're like in a maze or something. It's pitch black in front of you. All you can see is where your feet are going. It really takes you in directions you don't expect. And, based on maybe the first 60 seconds of the film, I never expected we would end up where we did at the end. This film begins in a very specific way, where it's edited. It's very dizzying and fractured, and like there's like a slow motion quality to it. And the camera is just following this very mysterious woman, this femme fatale stereotype, a woman in a blonde wig with sunglasses and a trench coat and the heels. And you hear the male protagonist narrating in a very film noir esque sort of way, saying that, you know, he will fall in love with this woman in the very near future. So immediately people like, you know, myself are looking at how we're being pulled in with those classic noir stereotypes, and then, you know, obviously how it's presenting it in a very different way. But already you have a sense of where this movie is guiding you. You know, instantly, of course, you think of movies like Vertigo or Double Indemnity, whatever. But I like that this film, you know, can go in a certain direction and really allow you to marinate in that and then change quite abruptly. And all of that sort of adds to the feeling of time slipping through your fingers, or people really trying to capture or freeze a moment in time, even though that's absolutely impossible. So because of that, the moments that really do matter, Wong Kar-wai really likes to emphasize them. And, you know, he's the kind of guy who clearly does not hesitate there. He does not hesitate to really give color to a moment. He can sort of like hang his coat on it and let it sit a while, you know, give it all the attention and detail that it deserves. And I just love the editing here because it is very creative. One of my favorite shots is the moment, and it's in the second half of the film with the second story, where you have your two main characters and they're, you know, it's like the camera's very distant from them and they're sitting across from each other, and it's, you know, they are in slow motion. But in the foreground are all these people passing in front of the camera, and they're going fast. And it's that contrast between the two that really emphasizes, you know, that feeling of time. And with this movie, it's like it's a burden time. You know, there's always an emphasis on clocks, on numbers, particularly on expiration dates. And there's a lot of overlap, a lot of mirroring, repetition of different moments throughout the film. And it can be repetition from the same character, or it can be repetition seen through a different character later on. And, you know, a lot of these characters are just visually reflected in mirrors and like, you know, like fractured glass. And of course, there's just this alien-like colors, just the neon lights and everything that highlight the streets of Hong Kong, which are very grimy and dark. And there is a beauty to it, but, you know, it's a complicated beauty. It's more like gutter poetry, as I like to say. That noir sort of melancholy feeling is always hanging over the film. And I like just where it takes place. You know, it takes place in an area that is just really, really crowded, and everybody is just always in close proximity with each other, and yet nobody seems to know each other. There seem to be no real connections. People just have their routines, they have what they have to do, and they just go past each other constantly. And again, it's that feeling of when there are so many people, everybody just sort of blends into one another. And you have all of these different energies that are bouncing off one another. And some people catch it, some people miss it. It's like little ping pong balls bouncing, and then you have, you know, above all of these very hollow lights and exhaustion fumes of the city. It's quite a sad image. And especially when you have characters who maybe really want to, you know, find something. They want to be able to move on with their lives from a feeling that they have that they can't escape. But, you know, maybe the timing just isn't right, or they are still just so inhabiting a feeling from a previous relationship where that fire has gone out and they can't really quite accept it yet. This film has two stories, and it's not until you see it a second time that you realize all of that is happening. So you begin your journey with one person meeting this, again, this mysterious femme fatale in the blonde wig and spending a night with her, and nothing happens. But you have your ideas of, it's like, okay, these two people are meeting at a bar, and you're just assuming if it's going to follow the traditional narrative, they probably will fall in love, and it's probably going to be a tragic sort of thing just based on what you see of this woman and the nature of her work. But there's just something really lovely, very sweet, awkward, and perhaps a little bit annoying, but I don't know, very endearing about the way that the protagonist is trying to seduce her. Mainly because obviously he is in a different headspace, but yet he has this hope for trying for something new. That whole scene where they meet just has this wonderful darkness to it, but again, very mysterious sort of darkness where you feel that absence of warmth in that, but that desperation for it at the same time. This whole film, just stylistically, reminds me a lot of something like Cowboy Bebop, using that nostalgia, a lot of those genre staples that we're used to, like film noir, but it starts to disintegrate, dissolve into something more existential when dealing with those deeper concepts. And once that second story begins, which is between the new cop and the girl at the restaurant, you constantly, as it's going on, you have this idea in your head that, well, these two characters are connected to the first two. They are going to show up somehow in some way to be paid off in a traditional way. In the same way that you might have a movie that has like a big ensemble cast, and typically how they tend to form stories that way is it depends a lot on coincidences, maybe forced coincidences of two characters meeting in a way that may not seem realistic, but it moves the story forward. But then at a certain point, you start to realize maybe they're not coming back. Maybe this is just entirely a new story, a completely new sort of vignette about the state of love or lack thereof. And at a certain point, you almost wonder if these two new characters are sort of reincarnation of the other two, or like, you know, maybe just two people in a parallel universe or a previous life, whatever. And I don't know, I just think a lot of human beings go about love and experience the feeling of love in the same way. It's just that, you know, all kinds of people are different. And that's just an example here. And again, like I said, there's a lot of mirroring in the movie, and even just in this idea of mirroring through character archetypes. Because with these two characters, even though the approach to it is definitely very different, they're definitely very different characters, it is that same sort of longing, that same sort of need for attachment, and all of that is juxtaposed with the claustrophobia of this very bustling city. And ironically, all of the most riveting moments tend to happen when the characters are alone, when they're just thinking about the other person, when they just miss each other, or when she is sitting in his apartment thinking about him. I don't know, there's just a really something very lovely about that. It's very exhilarating, and I just love the kind of dreaminess of that whole second half of the movie. Just, there is an uplifting quality. That longing becomes alive through the spark, through, you know, through the sunshine of this wonderful female protagonist character we have here. I love that there is an innocence to her, and it kind of reminds me of the male protagonist from the first half of the film. You know, she has this, I mean, it's different. I mean, she is very spacey, but there is this lack of awareness in terms of how she comes off, how she is perceived by other people. And there is a zany curiosity to her that I think she carries beautifully as an actress. I found myself feeling all kinds of things just watching her, you know, like with the music so loud she can't even think, just drifting from room to room, sort of dancing in her own little world in his apartment. It's so wrong, it's so weird, and yet, I don't know, I think it's just really, really beautiful. She is absolutely adorable. And I think any sadness that one might experience here that is underlying just comes from that aching sense of wildness that is just wanting to break free from the cage. All this love to give, just wanting to burst from these characters, but yet it is surrounded by all this clutter and this pollution and cars honking and all that, and they get lost in it. And yet there is this floating quality to her. You know, it's almost like she's floating above all of this, a sparkle in the grime. And I just love that experimental quality. It gives us a chance to see more of a glee, like that we just don't see often in movies. You know, a lot of movies, especially from auteurs, tend to be real heavy and dark, and this one doesn't feel like that. The director isn't afraid of that boundless creativity. He's not afraid to try new things. He's not afraid to explore different types of editing and different types of storytelling. He will do what he needs to find a more vulnerable center to something, to really reach the core of an emotion. And a lot of times, as I have said many times, I think some of the most successful films in that sense tend to be abstract. I think the more abstract you can go, the more you capture things that are, you know, buried within the soul, the things that you can't really express through things that are concrete, through literal storytelling. And that's part of, I think, why I like that the film begins in a way and then opens up kind of like this. It begins more confined by those genre stereotypes that I've mentioned, and then it frees it up for more originality by contrast, and allows everything to kind of drift naturally as it's supposed to in a very organic way. It's wonderful. And when you think about that idea, it really does remind me a lot of Vertigo. That's like the first movie I thought of when I first saw this film. It's like Vertigo, but opposite. Same sort of idea, and yet we arrive at something very different, much more hopeful. And I love how these characters at the end of the film, even though they haven't matched up quite yet, despite how all these, you know, elements of human sort of echo throughout each other, and we repeat a lot, we have a lot of the same habits, and we all run together. Sometimes just if a moment is right, something spontaneous can grow from that too. I do think if you've never seen this film, you absolutely should, just because of what it makes you feel. Even though this film does make me feel, ironically, it makes me feel very melancholy. I love the innocence to it and the humor. And I just love the childlike ambiance, the headspace that Wong Kar-wai inhabits is one that I'm a big fan of. It's like he can stay young because he hasn't lost that glee, that childlike abandonment and that innocence, and it's a beautiful thing to capture. And that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website. It is deepfocuslens.com. I am an artist and I do commission portraits and prints, and if you're interested in anything like that, you can just go to the link below, specifically Deep Focus Lens deepfocuslens.com/shop. And if you have a question about a print or a commission, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.